Well, I'm out on the track today, and boy is it cold. I've gone out a bit later because it was -1 when I got up. There's a fairly strong wind as well. It's about 3 degrees now, but with the wind chill, the real feel is about -5. I think you're either a winter rider or you're not. There's no middle of the road here. There's no, oh, I ride occasionally in winter. But this is the day where, as a winter rider, you question your sanity. Anyway, what I wanted to talk about today is the great tubeless debate, which kind of goes on, and nobody's really kind of come up with a one way is better than the other way argument. Again, I suppose it's a bit like the winter riding thing. You're either fully on board with it or you're not. Having said that, I was on the fence for a while. And I was on the fence because of this non-definitive. Some say yes, some say no. But before we get into it, I'll say that all my bikes are now tubeless. But that's not to say you should do the same as me. I just want to talk about the pros and cons. And the reason I've gone tubeless. So let's go through the pros and cons, or should I say what we've been sold as the pros and cons. So the first one, we've been told, is rolling resistance. There's less rolling resistance in a tubeless tyre. And that may well be the case. But I would say you've got to be pretty high up the performance scale before you'd notice. Some people will talk about weight saving, but really the weight of the tube, take that out, but then replace it with the weight of the sealant. I'm going to say there's nothing in it. And then the next one is comfort. And this is quite an interesting one, because the idea is the reason you can be more comfortable is you can run lower pressures, and that is true. That's a very simple one. If you run lower pressures, the ride will be more comfortable. There's no question about that. Nothing to be proved. Simple fact of life. But the interesting part is, when I got this bike, it had GR1 comp tyres on, which are a wire bead tubed only tyre. I rode it for a bit, felt it was a bit soft, so I asked the shop where I got the bike from what they recommended, and they recommended 30 psi, and that's quite low. And I decided that because I'm heavy, I'd run them at 40. And the idea of the low pressure on tubeless tyres is that you won't get pinch punctures. In other words, the tyre is so soft that the tube catches in between the sidewall of the tyre and the rim, and that will puncture the tyre. I ran those tyres until they wore out at 40 psi with a tube, and I didn't have any pinch punctures. So that's also open for debate. I'm running these Vittorio Tirreno Zeros on a 38mm tyre, and they reckon that the operating range on these tyres is 45 to 95. So even running them tubeless, I'm still £5 higher in pressure than I was running the old tyres with a tube. So that kind of puts pay to that argument. The big thing though is punctures. The idea is that the sealant inside the tyre will fill up the hole where the puncture is, and you can get home, and that's good. But I'll talk more about punctures later on. But the fact is, the sealant won't seal all holes, despite what they tell you about 6mm cuts and all this kind of thing. So you're still going to need to take a tube with you and a pump. So let's look at the downsides. Firstly, the rolling resistance we've spoken about. I don't know that I could tell the difference. Secondly, you need tubeless ready rims because you need a tape on them to keep the air in, basically. But that's less of a negative than you might think, because most modern wheels are tubeless ready. Even on lower end bikes. The other downside is the tyres are more expensive. But in reality, those are the tyres you're probably going to be using with a tube anyway, because they're lighter. So unless you're just riding your bike for commuting, you probably want reasonably good tyres on anyway. And then the other supposed disadvantage is you've got to carry tubes with you. But as I said, you need to carry tubes with you even if you are running tubeless, so that's less of a negative. So on balance, there's not much in it. Why? You might be asking, then, have you gone tubeless on all of your bikes? And the answer is simple. One reason only. The aforementioned punctures. Because it is so annoying. And, as I said, sometimes the sealant won't seal, but if it does, it'll get you home. Whereas with a tube, a puncture is a puncture every single time. I've spoken about it before. Bicycle tyres are really, really poor quality, and they're about as resistant to sharp objects as cigarette paper, and that's the reason I changed. This bike was kind of just left, had tubes in, sort of legacy, and never got around to changing it, and I decided I would wait until the next set of tyres went on. But I went out last week and only 3 miles into the ride I had a puncture, and I've had about 5 punctures in these tyres, and I had a rant, and I'll include that because I went out to try and make a video talking about my Shocks open fit headphones, which we'll have to get into later. I had this rant, and as I said, I'll include that right here. And here we have yet another puncture. It is so frustrating. I've spoken about it before, but bicycle tyres are shit. Really shit. I mean, this is an ordinary road. I haven't been riding through gravel or debris or anything at all, just an ordinary road. And I've got a puncture. And when I got home, there was a thorn, tiny little thorn, gone through the tyre. And it was so small, you would have struggled to burst a balloon with it. And yet, it went through a tyre that cost 50 quid. I've spoken about it before. You know, the expression that politicians and journalists like to use is not fit for purpose. But bicycle tyres aren't. I mean, imagine if you could just run over a tiny little thorn in your car, and that would be enough to puncture the tyre. I've had enough. So I threw the tube out, fill the tyre up with sealant, and so this is the only one that did have tubes in, and it's now tubeless.